Accused ISIS sympathizers arraigned right here. Another terror group teaming up with ISIS over there. Now, a new plan to fund our fight against ISIS everywhere with a war tax. But do we really need a tax hike to help take down the terrorists? Hi, everyone. I'm Brenda Butner. This is Bulls and Bears, and here they are, our Bulls and Bears this week. Gary B. Smith, Melissa Francis, Jonas Max Ferris, John Layfield, along with Sasha Burns. Welcome to everybody. Okay, Melissa, a temporary war tax to fund our fight against ISIS makes sense?
No, that's the worst idea I've ever heard. I mean, a temporary tax, there's no such thing. Once they get a tax in place, it never goes away. I know how you can find the money. Eric Holder says that Medicare fraud right now adds up to as much as $90 billion. The IRS says tax refund fraud is as much as $21 billion. Look, I just found you $100 billion of my money that's leaking out on the sides. Just use what you're getting already.
Well, you know, John, Melissa makes a great point about fraud and waste, but let's face it, Washington does not have the political will to take that down. Should we be bearing the cost as well as the brave soldiers over there?
I think we should. Look, and I agree with Melissa. There's no such thing as a temporary tax. I understand that the first federal income tax came in the Civil War. It was made permanent in World War II. Withholding tax was introduced in World War I. The tax being made permanent. We have put a tax in place. It's going to stay there. We have 20% of our budget right now goes to defense spending. 55% of our discretionary spending goes to defense. If we have something like Afghanistan or Iraq occurs again, I think once we bump that cap, we're already issuing war bonds. They're called treasuries. They're being bought by China instead of the 85 million Americans that bought them in World War II. We are deficit spending right now. I say we put a temporary tax in place that covers the war, but has to go to a vote to the American people, and once that war is over, the tax stops.
You know, Gary B., we already spend so much on defense. Compare what we're spending now to what we spent at the height of the Iraq and Afghanistan war.
Brenda, I'm scratching my head hearing John and Melissa talk like, well, you know, we need the money, but don't do the tax. We don't need the money, for crying out loud. As John pointed, we're spending 20% of the budget is spent on defense. We're now spending, the Pentagon budget is $600 billion. Brenda, we're spending $10 billion more in inflation-adjusted money than we were in 2005 when we were fighting Iraq and Afghanistan. Brenda, we're spending as much now as at the height of the Cold War in 1985 when Russia was spending $600 billion. You know what? Russia and China, they're spending less than half of what? Do we need to spend this much money? Do we need to spend more money than the next 11 countries combined? I don't think so. I think we're already spending more than enough money on defense.
Don't yell at me. I like you. Okay, Jonas, war tax.
And look at all the damage Russia could do on their limited budget for their defense. You know, I like paying for this ongoing perpetual defense budget that seems to always exceed what it's allocated with some of these wars. But I also don't want our enemies to think there are more bureaucratic steps for us entering the fray. You want your enemies to think that we can come in at any time and have unlimited money to destroy you. That's how you keep people from becoming like ISIS, because they don't think we're going to join up with much of a force. So you don't want to have an additional hurdle of now we got to pass a tax. What we would be debating that tax, and Hitler would be taking over all of Europe by now. So you want to pay for it when you get into it, and it's an ongoing cost, and acknowledge that, like Iraq war cost a lot more than we said. We would have had to raise taxes sooner, but you don't want to start in the beginning another barrier and make it embolden our enemies.
Sasha, what do you think?
Well, I agree with that, but I like the idea of the American people having skin in the game when we're talking about war. If you think about the tiny percentage of people that serve in the military and the burden that the military families have that the rest of us really don't know anything about. And I think if you had a national draft, if you had a surtax, people would think a lot harder about whether they wanted to go to war or not.
You know, Melissa, John made a great point. From the War of 1812 to World War I to the Korean War to Vietnam, we've used taxes to fund our fighting. Why not now?
Because they already have so much money. I mean, we don't need any more money to fund this fight when we're not even really out there fighting. I mean, why don't we come up with a strategy first? Why don't we attack this situation? I mean, why is the first thing that we're going to do tax us. I mean, it's become the American way. As soon as there's a problem, let's invent a tax to deal with it. No, let's come up with a solution and deal with the money that we already have that's been laid out for this. I mean, I don't know why we're even talking about more money.
You know, John, I've never seen you like a tax that you've met, but in this case?
Yes, but understand, once you hit the cap, we do have money to go after ISIS right now. We have money to go after Boko Haram right now in Africa. I'm talking about if we have a war, an extended war like Iraq or Afghanistan, where it bumps up against that military cap. Now I'm talking about adding a surtax to it. Sasha is right. The one thing that stopped Vietnam War was we had a draft and we had a huge surtax that was put in place. In fact, it was so big, the government actually ran a surplus in the late 1960s. People said we've had enough of this war. I think we need a little more sharing of the American people. But again, that does not discount the waste that is in this government that needs to be taken care of. That's a separate issue.
Okay, Gary B., take him on.
Well, I'm going back to Sasha's point. We should all have some skin in the game. We have some skin in the game. It's called the federal taxes. You know, John and I both pointed out 20% of the budget we're already spending is on defense. Where do you think that money's coming from? It's coming out of our pockets. Has anyone ever said how much money we need to fight ISIS? Why is it that Japan is 2% of their budget is spent on defense? We're spending 20%. No other nation spends as much. My gosh, I wish I was in the defense industry because they're the ones making all the money on this. The amount of money we're spending on defense to fight ISIS, are we trying to say that that's going to be more than fighting the Soviet Union at its peak? Someone needs to do a cost analysis, and I think the total price of fighting ISIS is already there in the money that we're spending.
Hey, Gary B., you know, you're right about this. Japan does not have to fight ISIS because we do.
But it's a world. All right, then use Japan, use United Kingdom, use Germany. They all have minuscule amounts compared to what we're spending, and fighting ISIS is a worldwide problem. It's not on our shoulders to once again be the world's policeman. We can't afford it.
Well, but Jonas, the Allies have never stepped up to the plate.
And also, when we have these costs in the short run that we borrowed, as we talked about the World War II, we do eventually get to a higher tax regime to pay for all those costs that we borrow on. So if we're going to have perpetual expensive wars and be the world's police, then we are going to have to pay for it down the road. As far as the skin in the game thing, the current president has made the tax code so progressive that most people do not have a skin in the game paying for wars. They pay payroll taxes. That is it. Does not go to the defense budget. We would have to go back to the Clinton era of tax increases below $250 to get everybody paying for the defense budget, or at least more people. So if you want to make that case, that's how it goes. Not an additional war tax that what we pay by rich people again. That's not more skin in the game by everybody.
Sasha, Gary B. says we've got skin in the game.
Well, I agree with you, Gary B., on that. I mean, trust me, I'm never calling for more in the defense budget. But if Iraq costs $2 trillion, and it's going to, counting for how long, the skin in the game is that we'll be paying for that in the future. Our kids and grandkids will be paying for that. So that's the way that if we don't address it now, if we don't pay for what we choose now and kick it down the road, I think that's a problem.
Gary B., 30 seconds, last word.
Well, I know where we can get the money. We can just kind of rip apart Obamacare, and that money's there. And Melissa came up with a couple of good areas. The money is there, just we need to move it around.
Okay, all right. That's got to be the last word. Thanks, guys.